You're about to hear 8 channels of drum mics going through 5 different kinds of preamplifiers costing from about $150 to over $4,000. Can you hear a difference? If your algorithm is anything like mine, you've been kind of bombarded with videos about microphone preamps over the past few weeks. And having owned a bunch of them over the past 20 years, I'll say it's pretty overwhelming just how many there are, how many different types, and how many different price points. And the question is, can you really hear a difference between a really cheap preamp and a really expensive preamp? When I was first starting out, trying to figure out which preamps were the right one for drums was a challenge, and they can be really expensive. So it was hard to know where to go with this. So I started doing shootouts, this mic on a snare drum going through this preamp or that preamp. And at the time, I really didn't hear that much of a difference. I listened to preamp A and preamp B, and, they both kind of sounded like drums to me. I definitely noticed a much bigger difference immediately with swapping out microphones. I found I could get a way bigger sonic difference between switching from this type to that type. And the other thing I realized was it's mostly about getting the part right, playing the right sounds, playing the right parts with the right feel, etc. So that's really what I focused on. I had a bunch of preamps that worked for me. They sounded fine, my clients are happy, problem solved. A couple of years ago, I redid this room, and I had sort of been mixing and matching preamps, just not really paying a whole lot of attention to it. So I decided to see what it sounded like if I actually put all the mics in one type of preamp on one kit. I noticed it really did make a difference. So I wanted to go further with that. Going back to my earlier experiments where they all kind of did the same thing, I was talking to my good friend Cooper Anderson, who knows a lot about this stuff. His point was that you probably won't notice a huge difference between one channel at a time, but if you start stacking up a whole bunch of channels, then you can really start to hear more of a difference between these preamps. Cooper made a point that the records I've been listening to my whole life were probably all recorded onto a console where every single channel had the exact same preamp, and that sound stacked up over the entire record kind of makes the end result, and you can start to get the flavor of this or that preamp. So let's try to do the same thing here. I happen to have 5 different types of preamps where I can get 8 channels, and I feel like that's going to be enough to hear whether or not there is a difference. I'm going to record this set of drums with 8 microphones. A kick-in mic, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, overhead left, overhead right, rack tom, floor tom. I'm going to play the exact same performance 5 different times. Each time it's going to go into a separate preamp. That's going to be the only thing that changes. I'm not going to move the mics, I'm not moving the drums, I'm not retuning, I'm not doing anything. Just merely moving the mic cables from one set of preamps to another. In a perfect world, I wish I had a 5-way splitter where I could play at one time and it would automatically go to 40 different preamps. I don't have that equipment. I don't have the budget for that equipment. You're just going to have to trust that I'm pretty consistent about playing the same part at the same volume level. I am human. There's going to be some minute differences. So take it all with a grain of salt. I recognize that I'm probably contributing to the preamp hysteria that's currently sweeping the internet, but I feel like it's important to do this stuff to answer the question, at least for myself. Does this stuff make a difference? Does it matter how much you spend on your preamps? Let's find out. I got my first RME Fireface 800 in about 2008, and I've loved their stuff ever since. I've got a UFX Plus that's been running the studio for several years, and their sister company, Ferrofish, makes my other converter. So I was really excited to see RME's 12 mic, which is 12 digitally controlled preamps plus conversion. It's a great unit. It has MADI built in, so I can do up to 96K without losing channel count. That counts for a lot, and it sounds great. The first preamps that I got where I really loved how different they sounded from whatever else I was using at the time is the Sebatron VMP-4000e. It's a 4-channel tube preamp with some EQ options as well as variable gains. You can kind of choose how hard you're hitting the tubes. I absolutely love this preamp. I have 2 of them, both of which I bought directly from Australia. I actually did a full shootout on these preamps maybe a decade ago, just exploring what all these different settings on the preamp do to a bunch of different microphones on different sources. And you can find that on YouTube. I'll put the link above. Around the same time I got into the Sebatrons, I discovered the Daking preamps, which were kind of described to me as sort of being in between a Neve and an API sound. And I don't have either of those preamps here to judge, but all I know is I love what they do. They're built like tanks. They sound great. I have 2 of those units as well. Now, all these preamps I just described are not cheap, and it took several years to build up that collection. If you're recording a set of drums, as you probably know, you need a bunch of mics, and it's the snare bottom and the hi-hat and the multiple rooms and all that stuff. I was looking for a good sounding preamp that didn't cost a fortune, which is when the Black Lion Auteur came onto my radar. They've worked really well for me for years, and I've owned multiple versions of these. Finally, on a lark, many years ago, my friend Mike Dawson at Drum Factory Direct told me about the Yamaha MLA7, which is an 8-channel preamp that I picked up used on eBay for $150. So we're going to throw that in the mix and see how it compares. The Yamaha preamps kind of bring up a different point, which is just, what do these things cost? I mean, there's a really wide range here between that Yamaha and, say, the Dakings, which were over $4,000 for 2 of those units. The 12 mic, I think, is $3,000. The Sebatrons are maybe $1,600 a unit. The Black Lion are $800 a unit. So, it's a real investment. Obviously, my collection of preamps is pretty idiosyncratic to my own needs and, 3 different drum sets, trying to get as big a sonic difference between the 3 of them as I can. But I think it'll be interesting for you as well to hear what these things sound like, because, unless you happen to work at a major audio dealer or are incredibly wealthy, budget's kind of going to determine what you have available to test out. Now, the next thing is conversion. And it's not going to be complete apples to apples here in the sense of the RME 12 mic already has built-in digital conversion. There's no option to output analog. So that's going to be converted just in the unit there. Everything else is going to go into the back analog inputs of my RME UFX Plus, and that will make sure that the conversion stays the same for 4 of the preamps, and the 5th is also RME conversion, so in theory it's going to be pretty close. Now, for each preamp, I've set up a template in Logic, which is identical for each one. We are setting our gain at about, to hit at -6, as close as we can get in the analog realm. Then, once we've recorded everything, it's all normalized to -6. Our goal is to get these shootouts as close to evenly matched as we possibly can, so we're just comparing apples to apples, where the only change is which preamp is amplifying these same microphones on the same set of drums with the same drummer in the same room. You're not going to hear any EQ or compression whatsoever. Any preamp that has, a high pass filter or some sort of EQ, that's been disabled, so it's just straight preamp recording these drums. This particular setup I'm using is the one I use for more modern contemporary sounds. It's a set of WTS drums, Sabian cymbals, Aquarian heads, great sounding modern punchy kit. Let's look at microphones. For the kick in, we have the Telefunken M82 dynamic with the kick EQ and the high boost engaged. Kick out is the Solomon Low Freak dynamic. Snare top is the Telefunken M80, Telefunken M82 on snare bottom. Overheads are Telefunken's TF11 large diaphragm condensers. And on the toms, we have the Lauten tom mics. As I mentioned, there's absolutely no EQ or compression on any of these channels. The only plugin you're going to hear is Auto Align 2 by SoundRadix. And this is just pulling every channel in phase with each other channel on that kit. It's a great plugin and absolutely indispensable for any time you're recording a source with more than 2 microphones, which definitely includes a set of drums. I swear by Auto Align 2. Now, when we do the shootouts, I'm not going to tell you what they are immediately because it's really easy to look at the dollar sign attached to a preamp and think, oh, that one's going to sound better than that one because it's 10 times the price, which may be the case and it may not be the case. So we're going to listen to Apple, Orange, Banana, Pineapple, Mango preamps. Enough setup. Let's hear what these things are doing. What'd you think? Feel free to pause the video right now and in the comments write what you thought each one was. Was it really obvious which one cost 150 bucks and which one was $4,000? Here's the reveal. Apple was the RME 12 mic. Orange was the Daking. Banana is Sebatron. Pineapple was the Black Lion Auteur. And mango was the Yamaha. Any surprises for you? Were they dramatically different, night and day from each other? Were they all pretty close to the same? What'd you think? Now, it's all well and good to play these things in solo, and you know, if we were just doing drum solos on Instagram, great. Pick the one you like and go from there. But in reality, I mean, I'm using these preamps to record drums to a whole bunch of different kinds of songs and a whole bunch of sonic scenarios. Let's hear what these things actually sound like with some music. So I am joined by producer, composer, and musician Max Chaplin.
Hi.
We're going to listen to two completely different performances. The only thing changing, once again, is the preamps. One's pretty dark and heavy and loud. The other one's a little lighter and airy. I'll put the preamp names with the performances because, you know which one's mango at this point. I love all these preamps. They're my preamps. I use them every day. The big surprise was that Yamaha, which I actually hadn't really played with until this shootout. That's a pretty impressive little unit for 150 bucks. I think it was 140 plus $10 shipping or something. I mean, it really was inexpensive, and there are a bunch of them out there. They're not rare by any stretch. If you're on a budget, pick a couple of those and you record your band, and it's going to sound great, especially when you throw, the slightest amount of EQ on any of these. If one of them's a little darker or whatever, and you want to brighten up, well, that's what EQ is for. I guess my other final takeaway is this. I've never once had a client reject drum tracks because the preamps weren't expensive enough or the converters weren't the right kind of converter or whatever. It's if it sounds good, they're happy. If clients want revisions on drum tracks, it's because, you picked a high-pitched snare and I want a low-pitched snare, or you didn't play the right fill going into the bridge, or, whatever. I want AI drums. But it's never about the preamps and, what kind of conversion I used. It's easy to get sucked into internet squabbles about how much of this stuff matters, and it does. Everything matters. But on the other hand, nothing really matters aside from, do your parts sound good? Do they fit to the song? That's probably the most important thing. So, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, etc. You know the deal. See you next time.